on this topic, but basically nobody really uses document preferences in evaluation forums like CLAY, TREC, NTCIR, and I wanted to look at the possibility of using these measures for web search. So that's what I did. And my co-author is Jiahao Zhang. He's a PhD student of mine. So this is basically the takeaway. I looked at some document preference-based measures, and some of them work. And what I looked at is the agreement with human judgments when it comes to SERP preferences. So given SERP A and SERP B, the measure says SERP A is better, and then there is a bunch of people who does the same preference judgment, and I looked at whether this measure's judgment agrees with all of these people. So basically, I'm trying to copy what Mark did for CIR 2010, I guess. But this is for preference-based IR measures primarily. And the bottom line is that some of these preference-based measures work okay, but the best overall measures are the traditional graded relevance-based measures like NDCG and this thing called IRBU, which I basically stole from someone else. Okay, and some of these best measures are actually as good as the best human measure or the best human assessor. So I will give you the details. So this is my outline. Yes, so we discussed this at last year's NTCIR as well. Why are we not moving to pairwise preference assessments from absolute graded relevance assessments, even though some people said there are a few advantages of using preference-based measures. For example, in Ben's paper from ECIR 2008, he argues that it's very difficult to define in advance what is highly relevant, what is relevant, and how many relevance levels there should be. And if you have many relevance grades, to judge a document, the burden on the assessor increases, and so on. And from a machine learning point of view, if you have document preferences as the gold data, of course, it can be used directly for pairwise learning to rank, and so on. Those things, these things were argued in the ECIR 2008 paper. And of course, if we want to talk about document pairs instead of individual documents, we need to worry about the assessment cost. But it looks like several people have looked at ways to reduce this cost, for example, by trying to infer unjudged document pairs from judged document pairs. So I thought maybe it's worth looking at these preference-based measures, particularly from the viewpoint of whether they actually agree with users' judgments. So actually, Ben and his colleagues were not the first to propose preference-based measures. At least I found this 1991 IPM paper, which actually proposes preference-based evaluation measures. But I found that these measures are set retrieval measures, not ranked retrieval measures. And also these old measures, they do not provide an absolute score to a SERP. They focus on comparing two SERPs. So I'm not talking about this in this work. So my central question was, do these preference-based measures actually agree with users' SERP preferences? Okay. So the evaluation framework is pretty simple. It's basically similar to what Mark and his colleagues did in the CIR 2010 paper. So in this diagram, you can see that this measure in black says SERP 1 is better than SERP 2. Now we have the gold data based on real people. I actually have 15 people for every SERP, but for simplicity, I just drew 5 people. Now, in this example, the agreement rate of this evaluation measure is 60%, right? So I actually have 15 people per SERP, but this is the way I compute the agreement rate. And of course, I have lots of SERP pairs, so I can talk about mean agreement rates for different evaluation measures. And also, I can treat each judge as an evaluation measure and compute the mean agreement rate for each judge as well, the human measure as well. So the data I used originally comes from the NTCIR intent task. This is a Japanese subtask, but for my research, the language does not matter. So originally, this was a diversified search test collection, and the target corpus was a portion of ClueWeb. So this is a web search data. And last year at SIGIR, where I talked about a similar topic, but about diversity evaluation measures and traditional evaluation measures, I created this data set and released it publicly. So I have all these SERP pairs from the real search results from the intent task. So I have 894 SERP pairs, and each SERP pair was judged independently by 15 assessors. Okay, and I have 894 where it is ensured that at least 9 judges agreed as to which of the SERPs is better. So these SERPs cover 43 topics, and also I converted, using a simple method, I converted the original diversity QRELs into a regular traditional ad hoc QRELs. I still have 5-point graded relevance data after converting the QRELs into an ad hoc QRELs. So this was what I did for SIGIR 2019. Now this time, I newly created this data set of document preferences. So I extracted, I guess I can, do you see my laser pointer? No?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so I have these SERPs, and from these SERPs, I extracted all the documents and all the document pairs. And for all of these document pairs, I constructed a document preference data set. So for every document pair, 3 assessors were hired and independently made document preference assessments. So there is a redundancy. For every document pair, I have 3, sometimes 2 different document preferences. So this is the new data set released publicly. So using these document preferences, now I can compute preference-based measures proposed by Ben Carteret and his colleagues, and also traditional evaluation measures, and some of the measures I wanted to try for myself. So evaluation measures, there are several ways to summarize a set of measures, like the way Alistair and his colleagues do, and the way Ben Carteret and his colleagues do. This is a simple way I have, which I proposed with Steve Robertson back in 2008. EVIA is a NTCIR workshop on evaluating information access, which I think Mark and I started in 2007. Okay, so this is the general formula for normalized cumulative utility. This covers several different measures, for example, precision, average precision, my measure called Q measure, RBP, and expected reciprocal rank. And these are something new that I discussed in last year's SIGIR paper. So what this NCU means is that there is a user population, and there is this abandoning probability. So for a particular user group, this user group abandons the ranked list at a particular rank R. And for this user group, the utility of the SERP seen so far is given by this formula. So I know, Alistair, Justin, you don't like this formulation, but average precision assumes that there is a user group on every relevant document, and the distribution of these users over all relevant documents is uniform, and the utility is given by precision for each user group, and so on. RBP can be understood in that way as well. If you look at ERR, this is an interesting measure because this stopping probability, as you know, depends on the actual relevance in the search result. So, for example, if you see a highly relevant document, there is a that means fewer people will go down further down the list. Okay, and then the utility is given by reciprocal rank. That's ERR. So you can see that these are variants are just different combinations of these probabilities and utility functions. And one of them is IRBU, which steals the probability from ERR and steals the utility function originally from RBU, measured proposed in CI 2018. And what's interesting about this utility function is that this is not utility at all. So P is like the P of RBP, like 0.99, and R is the number of documents seen so far. So you can see that this does not consider relevance at all. This is just like inverse effort. This just reflects how many documents have been seen by the user. So, so there you go. So these are the traditional measures I considered. Since I have released all the data, you can also try your favorite measures for yourself. Now, for preference measures, I tried a variety of measures, but I will talk about some of the good ones. So this is the wpref measure. This is an extension of the measure proposed in Ben's papers. And this looks like this. Basically, it's like NDCG. I'm not giving you the detailed formula here, but basically it's like NDCG. The only difference is that we look at pairs of documents. So for example, if you have a document I here and document J here, this is a preference suggested by this SERP saying I is better than J, right? And instead of looking at individual documents, you can look at all these preferences and compute something like NDCG. And you can discount the value of these preferences using ranks, just like NDCG. And what's interesting about these preference-based NDCG-like measures is that because we have these two ranks, the rank of the document I and the rank of the document J, we have two choices of the rank based on which we can, define the log-based discount function. So I tried all three. Ben suggested I and J. So I is the preferred document. J is the unpreferred document. I tried averaging both. So I have three variants based on binary relevance. And because in my data, as I said, I have redundancies, that means for a given document pair, I have multiple preferences. They can be in agreement, they can be conflicting, it's okay, but I have several judgments for a given document pair. So using these preference redundancies, I can define graded relevance. So in total, I have these 6 different variants of Ben's measures. And also, I looked at the role of explicit preferences and implicit preferences in these measures. That means, so for example, in this SERP, document I and J are included, and J is ranked above, I is ranked above J. So this is an explicit preference expressed by this SERP. This SERP explicitly says I is better than J. Now, also there are implicit preferences. I have this document preference data, which says doc K is preferred over doc L. Now, this SERP does not retrieve doc L, but retrieves doc K. So it implicitly says that K is actually better than this unretrieved document L. So this is an implicit preference. So I designed measures that are solely based on explicit preferences and those solely based on implicit preferences as well. And the regular measures, they just use both of these preferences. I also tried something lazy. I like simple and lazy approaches. So instead of designing a preference-based measure, can we just reuse traditional graded relevance measures? So I call them the delta measures. So what I did was, so originally we have the preference data, document preference data. These are the preferred documents. These are the unpreferred documents. From this, you can create a partially ordered graph, right? So each edge represents a preference. And since we can, so there could be ways to convert this graph into this linear list of graded relevance documents. But I tried something simple called delta order, which basically just counts the number of incoming edges and also the number of outgoing edges. Of course, we can try other stuff like page rank and things, but I just tried something simple. Now, having converted the document preferences to absolute graded relevance, now we have this continuous graded relevance. I can just compute NDCG, RBP, or whatever you like. So I call these measures delta measures. So I will give you some results. Before showing you some results, in the actual Sakai paper, I used Kendall's tau to quantify the agreement with users' SERP preferences. Now I like this method better, the mean agreement rate method better. So I will show you these results instead. So in the Sakai paper, and also the one from last year, what I did was, even though I had 15 assessors, I created a single gold preference by majority voting, and then computed Kendall's tau based on the number of concordant SERP pairs and number of discordant SERP pairs. Here I preserve the original votes and compute the mean agreement rate, meaning on average how many users agreed with this measure's decision regarding SERP pairs. Okay, now I can talk about mean agreement rates for different measures and also human measures, and do a multiple comparison procedure like the Tukey HSD test. So I will talk about these numbers. I think that these are more informative. So to give you some of the results, I'm showing you the top results only. So this column shows the actual evaluation measures. The ones in bold are traditional evaluation measures based on absolute graded relevance, and the other ones are preference-based measures. And on the right, we have the 15 judges evaluated as if they were just another evaluation measure. So they have the advantage. For example, this assessor number 3 was compared with all 15 assessors, including themselves. So at least one assessor agrees with him or her all the time. So this person achieves 82% mean agreement rate. So this one is the best assessor. Here we have the median assessor, 78%. Even the worst assessor achieves like 68%. In the Sakai 2019 paper, I ensured that all of these 15 assessors were doing a good job by looking at inter-assessor agreements. Okay, so these are, I think, representative of normal people. Now, if we look at the achievements of the actual evaluation measures, you can see the best measures in terms of mean agreement rates are NDCG and this IRBU measure. They achieve like 80% in terms of mean agreement rates, which is quite impressive considering the fact that the median assessor's mean agreement rate is 78%. Okay. Now, if we look at preference-based measures, they do well. The best measures are measures like wpref 5, 6. They utilize graded relevance, and they also achieve like 78%. And if you look at these parts, you can see that there is an I, meaning these are measures based only on implicit preferences. All the ones with an E, meaning explicit preferences, they are at the bottom of the list. So that means implicit preferences are more important than explicit preferences, possibly because we have more implicit preferences than explicit preferences. But anyway, so you can see the main result here. So in words, regarding preference-based evaluation measures, these measures look like the most promising. They use the rank of the unpreferred document J, both of these, and also they use graded relevance. Although the differences within this family of measures, they're not really significant, but this is an indication that using graded relevance works even for preference-based measures. And as I said, implicit preferences are more important than explicit preferences. Like I said, probably because we have more implicit preferences than explicit preferences. For example, I'm looking at the top 10 web search results. So a top 10 web search results just gives us like 45 document pairs, and only some of them can be used in the computation of explicit preferences like this one. We have a lot more implicit preferences given a SERP. So a slightly depressing news is that these best preference-based measures are not quite as good as these best traditional measures like NDCG. And the best preference-based measures actually statistically significantly underperform the best assessor. Whereas the measures like NDCG, they are actually statistically not distinguishable from the best assessor. So overall, NDCG and this measure called IRBU, which I stole from a CIR 2018 paper, they look like the most promising measure in terms of the mean agreement rate. They outperform 19 or 16 other evaluation measures. Okay, basically that's it. But I will a few observations. So I thought evaluation measures are just surrogates and very poor surrogates of users' judgments. But it looks like when it comes to saying whether SERP 1 is better than SERP 2, they are actually, the best measures are actually doing a great job, right? And for example, these measures, even the preference-based measures, outperform the median assessor on average. So my question would be, what would be the reason for the IR community to actually move to the preference-based paradigm? I don't have a convincing answer because the measures I tried based on preferences are not quite as good as NDCG, right? And we still have the assessment cost problem. In my actual paper, I actually reduced the amount of document preferences and looked at the effect on the mean agreement rate. And obviously, as we reduce the number of document preferences, the mean agreement rate declines. So at this point, I don't have a good reason to really move from absolute graded relevance to the preference-based paradigm. Another small point maybe is that this IRBU measure, which is actually a component of this RBU measure. In other words, RBU is basically intent-aware IRBU. Anyway, this works surprisingly well, even though this utility part of the measure completely ignores the relevance information. So the relevance information in the SERP is encoded entirely in this user's stopping probability. Okay, if you're interested in evaluation measure design, this might be of some interest to you. So basically that's it, and I already showed you this slide, and yes, so I have already released the data, both the SERP data and the document preference data. So if you didn't like the set of measures I considered, you can add your measures and reproduce my experiments and expand my experiments. And I think that concludes my talk. Thank you.